Hi everybody, this is SAAD. I decided to take a few minutes off from my preparation for tomorrow's symposium on evolutionary consumption that I'm hosting at the John Mosley School of Business. If you're in the area, I hope that you can come. It's free, it's open to the public, and you can come and go as you please. Of course, it would be great if you can stay for all of the speakers, but if you can't, because your schedule doesn't permit it, then choose the speakers that you're most interested in and come and enjoy yourself. But in any case, today I wanted to finally weigh in on a story that broke a few days ago. Some of you may have heard that three researchers uh, had been sending uh, papers that they had made up to various prestigious journals within the sphere of uh, so-called grievance studies. And seven of those papers had gotten in, and several others were still in the works, but they ended up deciding to pull the plug uh, because their cover was going to be blown. Any case, I'll weigh in on some reactions that I've seen, some regrettable reactions that I've seen in the public sphere. But before I do that, I thought that I would read you. Some of you may not have access to some of the accepted papers, some of which have now been retracted. Probably the one that received the most attention is the following one. It is a paper, let me just look for it here. Human Reactions to Rape Culture and Queer Performativity at Urban Dog Parks in Portland, Oregon by, it's in a journal, Gender, Place, and Culture, um, by Helen Wilson, who was affiliated with the Portland Ungendering Research Initiative. So let me read you the abstract, and then I'll just read you a couple of passages. And it truly is impossible to stress how unbelievably brilliant and funny. This is SAAD level satire. I mean, that's a big endorsement. I couldn't get through any page. It is so funny. You just end up cracking up. So whatever number of passages I read to you now, it won't lend justice to how astonishing that such a paper could get into a supposed academic journal. So anyways, abstract. This article addresses questions in human geography and the geographies of sexuality by drawing upon 1 year of embedded in situ observations of dogs and their human companions at 3 public dog parks in Portland, Oregon. So far so good, makes sense. The purpose of this research is to uncover emerging themes in human and canine interactive behavioral patterns in urban dog parks to better understand human moral decision making in public spaces and uncover bias and emergent assumptions around gender, race, and sexuality. Specifically, and in order of priority, I examined the following questions. How do human companions manage, contribute, and respond to violence in dogs? Okay. 2. What issues surround queer performativity and human reaction to homosexual sex between and among dogs? All right, we're starting to lose it. And 3. Do dogs suffer oppression based upon perceived gender? It concludes by applying Black feminist criminology categories through which my observations can be understood, and by inferring from lessons relevant to human and dog interactions to suggest practical applications that disrupt hegemonic masculinities and improves access to emancipatory spaces. The introduction is just unbelievable. It's just brilliant, but I just want to read you part of the observation. So this is when the researcher in question is describing the observational method. The usual caveats of observational research also apply here. While I closely and respectfully examined the, the genitals of slightly fewer than 10,000 dogs, being careful not to cause alarm and moving away if any dog appeared uncomfortable, there is some relevant margin of error concerning my observation about their gender in some instances. It is also more than possible, in fact, it is inevitable, though I endeavored not to make assumptions, that I misgendered some of their human companions. That is, I tagged a gender to a person who did not self-identify with that gender. In some of the more extreme cases, as is related to pronounced dog behavior, starting fights, urinating on people, humping, or other penetrative acts, I attempted to address this shortcoming by asking human companions their preferred pronouns, as situating the results against McKittrick's 2006 hegemonic presence of the white male subject required this data. If people were comfortable with my question, I then interrogated them further and inquired sensitively into their sexual orientation. So this is kind of the usual, transgender issues. Then the conclusions are just incredible when the researcher in question, the quote researcher, starts to present the data. But I want to read you. This is going to be a bit long. On the social structural oppression that they've identified in this paper. They've also identified the intersection covariant relationship between communities and cultures, and the oppressed dog, and so on and so forth. But let me just read you a couple of passages. So, occupying the former category, I'm particularly struck by the similarities to the literature on compulsory heterosexuality. I won't read the references. Dog parks are microcosms where hegemonic masculinist norms governing queering behavior and compulsory heterosexuality can be observed in a cross-species environment. They are thusly oppressive spaces that lock both humans and animals into hegemonic patterns of gender conformity that effectively resist bids for emancipatory change. To clarify within the understanding of compulsory heterosexuality, it is the male who imposes sexual behaviors and expectations thereof upon the female in order to dominate and control her, and any subversion of this in the form of queer behavior is seen as a threat to this hierarchy and its perception as the natural order. By analogy, through an animalizing lens, we should expect male human companions to enforce heterosexuality upon dogs in order to control them while responding to and reinforcing their own hegemonic patterns of masculinity. And this I witnessed in full display by responding to deviations from normative heterosexual behavior in dogs with punishments, sometimes physically. As noted in the data section, male-male raping/humping was intervened upon 97% of the time versus only 32% of the time in male-female incidents, and 100% of physical punishment in response to a rape/humping incident by means of shock collar was for male-male rape-humping incidents. Further, among the 39 times dogs were struck by an adult human companion, 14 times more than any other reason were accounted for male-male rape-humping incidents, meaning that the humans are not happy when they see two male dogs humping because they don't appreciate that form of quote homosexual behavior. Wherein it concerns rape humping behavior, the social structure reach of oppressive patriarchal norms reach a zenith in dog parks, rendering them not only gendered spaces, but spaces that exhibit and magnify toxic and violent themes intrinsic to gender binaries. There is little male tolerance for queering acts, while rape humping of female dogs is often permitted, condoned, not stopped, or in some cases laughed at. In all cases, the species-centric mechanisms to keep oppressive masculine systems in place are enforced by shouting or hitting. Dog parks are therefore spaces remarkably opposed to progress in both feminist geography and the geographies of sexuality, these being reflective of broader hegemonic constraints of society at large. Hegemonic straight masculinist norms in spaces like urban dog parks thus substitute for social structural oppression. The masculinist norms are a way to oppress queering acts and female dogs, and dog parks are spaces in which these acts of oppression aren't merely tolerated but are actively encouraged. It is in the unabashed public character of these norms, specifically with regard to discharging them in a public space, where we see Potter's work reified. Rather than latent structural and oppressive systems that often work to conceal racist and sexist intent, in dog parks, the entire oppressive masculinist system operates in plain view. Its public character is thus self-perpetuating, reinforcing, and self-approbating. And it goes on and on and on and on. Now, I think you've gotten the point of what the paper looks like. All these papers look like. So here's Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll is a well-respected physicist. I met him and we interacted at the Logical conference where we were both invited speakers back in, I think it was January 2017. Here's what he writes on his Twitter feed. Substantive merits of these fields aside, what strikes me about stunts like this is their fundamental meanness. No attempt to intellectually engage with ideas you disagree with, just trolling for lulz. I guess that means laughs. I wish we could be better. Oh, so progressive, so accommodating. So I wrote back, really? At Sean M. Carroll? Let's quit the, quote, let's all love one another nonsense. These fields are nothing short of intellectual terrorism. Demonstrating how fraudulent and corrupt they are defends the dignity of human reason. Chamberlain appeasement is a losing evolutionary strategy. So imagine when someone like the physicist Sean Carroll, who technically should be about as committed to the scientific method, to reason, to logic, to science, to evidence-based thinking, is saying, but it's so mean when you demonstrate how vacuous, how fraudulent these fields are. Right, because when a undercover cop pretends that he is a drug dealer to catch a drug dealer, or pretends to be part of a pedophile ring so that he can catch sadistic pedophiles, we should say, but that's not fair. I mean, you pretended that you were also a pedophile, and now you caught us. That's not nice. That's not honest. What these folks did is not unlike what endless contexts occur where you have to be somewhat duplicitous for a greater goal. I'm not sure if this is a good analogy, but if someone came to you and said, be honest, the Nazis came to you, be honest, swear on this thing under threat of perjury that you are not a Jew, but you are a Jew, and then you sign it that you're not a Jew, then someone will come, what kind of person are you? You mean you lied, you were fraudulent, and said that you weren't a Jew when you truly are a Jew? When anti-terror forces try to infiltrate a terror group to dismantle it, do people typically say, but that wasn't honest, that was unethical, that was immoral? You lied about being yourselves terrorists, when in reality you were part of governmental forces. That was so dishonest. Well, in the exact same way that one has to be duplicitous in terms of their identity when trying to infiltrate a terror group, that these researchers engaged in this stunt so that they could dismantle this intellectual terrorism sham should not be something that should lead to criticism or scorn, as some people are now suggesting. They were fraudulent, they were unethical, they were immoral. Believe me, no one has a more exacting moral compass than I do, and I certainly don't think that they are frauds for demonstrating that whole fields of, quote, studies are fraudulent. How else would you demonstrate that, right? So in the same way that there are, well, endless ways by which police forces will use all sorts of duplicitous schemes to stop someone from hiring a hitman, right? What about this? When you set up a sting operation and you pretend to be the hitman because you want to catch someone who is trying to hire for a killing contract on, say, their spouse, do you then come along and say, what kind of immoral, unethical, dishonest monster would pretend to be a hitman to stop another person from hiring a hitman to kill their spouse? Same thing here. These people had to do whatever they had to do so that they could demonstrate how empty, how nihilistic, how terrorizing in the sense that it is a form of intellectual terrorism against the edifice of reason, right? As I've mentioned before, the 19 hijackers on 9/11 flew planes onto buildings. and they were called terrorists. Well, the people who quote practice in these fields in quotes, are driving, flying planes of gibberish, planes of nonsense, planes of grotesque, racist, sexist identity politics, planes of anti-reason bullshit onto the edifices of reason that we have erected since the founding of the scientific method, since our commitment to reason, to logic, to evidence-based thinking. And these people came along and said, well, we're going to try to contribute to the dismantling of these fields. So they should not be criticized. They should be congratulated for having tried to shed light on this cancer that is growing within academia. Think about the hundreds of thousands of students who have lost an opportunity to get a real education because they enrolled in fat studies and intersectional black lesbian feminism. Again, this is not an attack on the identity of people, right? It's an attack on grievance fields that are as far removed from any sense of an education that one can get. And the faster that academia purges itself from this nonsense, now again, the better it will be. Again, I don't mean to imply that literature is soft, or that you could study many things in the humanities, in the arts, in a very rigorous way, right? I mean, a liberal arts education is still a wonderful goal to try to achieve, to be a well-rounded, educated person. But all of these grievance studies, all of this postmodernism and post-structuralism and deconstructionism and queering of geography and glaciology and feminist epistemology and feminist chemistry and feminist mathematics and on, is nonsense. It is a rejection of reason, and the university is there to educate us, not to create intellectual terrorists. So kudos to the people who pulled the stunt, and may they have contributed to the dismantling of the bullshit that is growing within academia. Cheers.